Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. Let's just take a moment. Picture this. It's a quiet Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. Sun's coming up over Pearl Harbor. Looks peaceful.
Deceptively peaceful.
Exactly. And then, just like that, the sky rips open. Not dawn, but Japanese planes. Bombs falling everywhere, right into the heart of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
It's chaos. Ships like the USS Oklahoma just roll over. The USS West Virginia, a total inferno.
And in that one moment, that single shattering moment, a nation that had tried so hard to stay out of the world's mess, was suddenly, completely inescapably at war.
It really was, as Roosevelt famously called it, a day of infamy. And that phrase, it perfectly captures the massive shift that happened right then.
It wasn't just about entering the war, though, was it? It was more profound than that.
Oh, absolutely. This event, it didn't just pull the U.S. into a global conflict. It sort of shocked it out of the Great Depression's shadow. And what came next was, well, frankly, astonishing. In under 4 years, through sheer effort and sacrifice, America transformed itself, became the most productive, most powerful nation on earth.
That speed, that total mobilization, especially for a democracy, it says something powerful about, I guess, the American spirit or resilience.
It really does. And it's often underestimated, that capacity.
And that transformation, that huge pivot. That's exactly what we want to unpack today. We've got stacks of historical accounts, firsthand stories, expert analyses.
It's a real wealth of material.
Our mission here is to kind of distill World War II down into its most compelling stories. We want to go beyond just dates and battles.
We're looking at the key decisions, right? The surprising origins, the human experiences that really shape this whole global conflict.
From the Pacific Islands to the Eastern Front, the deserts of North Africa, the beaches of Normandy, we're taking you on a journey.
To understand the human side of it all, the nobility, the agony, the despair, and yes, the moments of triumph, too.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to really grasping the immense scale, the personal cost of this monumental war. So let's start right where America's direct involvement exploded onto the scene. Okay, let's dig into this. A country trying so hard to avoid war is suddenly plunged right in. How did America even get to that point? And what about Japan? What was their path to launching such an audacious attack?
It's fascinating, isn't it? You can trace a line, maybe surprisingly, back to Commodore Matthew Perry's visit in 1853, his warships showing up in what's now Tokyo Bay, that shattered centuries of Japanese isolation.
An unwelcome visit, as the sources call it.
Deeply unwelcome, but it forced Japan open, exposed them to Western ideas, technology, military systems, all at incredible speed. In just 88 years, they went from this isolated feudal society to a major industrial and military power.
And that rapid change fueled ambition.
Big time. Dreams of empire. It morphed into this almost reckless quest for dominance. They needed resources. They wanted regional supremacy. And Pearl Harbor became the ultimate expression of that drive.
So not just a bolt from the blue, but really the violent endpoint of decades of ambition and modernization. And just before December 7th, there was this whole diplomatic dance going on, right? A charade almost.
Oh, completely, a charade. On November 17th, 1941, Tokyo sends Washington its minimal conditions for peace, basically demanding the U.S. end the embargo, stop helping China, recognize Manchukuo, give Japan access to the Dutch East Indies, the whole Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere.
Quite a list, and they wanted Hull to get it to Roosevelt urgently.
Yes, but Washington's response on November 26th was a sharp rejection, no deal.
Which, from Japan's viewpoint,
it was seen as an ultimatum, an attempt to subjugate them, making war, in their eyes, inevitable.
But they kept talking.
That's the incredible part. Their own internal messages said peace efforts should be continued to the last moment, pure pretense, because the Imperial Conference on December 1st had already greenlit the war.
Oh.
The very next day, the General Staff issues the order. X day will be December 8th, which, because the dateline was December 7th in Hawaii and the U.S.
So the military wheels were already turning in secret, while diplomats were still technically at the table. The level of deception is just staggering.
It really is. The task force heading for Pearl Harbor had actually sailed from Tankin Bay way back on November 25th. Total radio silence, orders to sink anything they encountered.
And then the code message.
East winds, raining, sent on November 30th. That signaled the final diplomatic break was happening. And the tragic irony, Ambassador Kurusu and Admiral Nomura were still in Washington, supposedly making a last-ditch effort for peace.
Completely unaware.
Totally unaware. They were just decoys, pawns in their own government's deadly game.
The sheer audacity.
Yeah.
It's hard to fathom. Okay, so let's try to bring that morning to life. What was it actually like for people there? We have some first-hand accounts, right?
We do, powerful ones. Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, he led the first wave of Japanese planes. He described that moment. 7:49 a.m., the recon planes confirmed the targets. 10 battleships, cruisers,
Yeah.
right there off Oahu.
And the weather cooperated.
Sky cleared perfectly, an open view. He gives the order, notify all planes to launch attacks. And almost instantly, bombs hit Ford Island, Hickam Field. Chaos erupts on the American side.
But for a few Americans, the reaction was immediate, instinctive almost.
Absolutely. Lieutenants George Welch and Ken Taylor, Army Air Force pilots, they're in the officers' club at Wheeler Field, see the first dive bombers.
No hesitation.
None. Jump in their car, floor at 100 miles an hour to get to their P-40 fighters. No orders, just launched straight into the fight. Took on Japanese planes over Barbers Point. Down 3 before they even had to refuel.
Incredible individual heroism in the middle of total confusion.
Exactly, but down on the ships, the destruction was just horrific.
What did the account say?
Take the USS West Virginia. The front part of the ship, just a mass of flames and shattered, twisted metal, bodies everywhere on deck, men on fire, running, jumping overboard.
And the Japanese planes were strafing them in the water.
Yes, unbelievable terror. But then, amidst it all, you hear this calm voice. The ranking officer who survived calls out, "Take it easy, don't get excited, leave the ship for Ford Island."
And then he went back into the flames himself.
He did, and many who got out were terribly burned, could barely move. It just paints this picture of sheer terror mixed with raw, selfless courage.
Okay, but this next part, this is where it gets really fascinating, isn't it? The immediate reaction back home, that visceral response to this kind of devastating attack. What does that tell us about, well, the American people?
It really raises a fundamental question about national unity, doesn't it? Where does that strength come from? The public response to Remember Pearl Harbor was instantaneous. Overwhelming.
People lining up for hours just to give blood.
For 7 hours.
Yeah.
A direct personal way to help. At the Navy hospital, they had to quickly move out the recovering patients to make room for the waves of injured coming in on stretchers.
Young guys, lost arms,
Yeah.
legs, terrible burns.
Hundreds burned. Yet the spirit was described as unbelievable. What really struck observers inside that hospital, filled with the dying, the suffering, was the silence.
Silence.
Profound silence. No confusion, no crying out. It's more than just resilience, isn't it? It's this quiet, unified determination that just crystallized out of the shock. A powerful sign of the nation's ability to focus, to act together, turning tragedy into this unprecedented mobilization.
So as the smoke is literally clearing over Pearl Harbor, the world is already deeply embroiled elsewhere, especially Europe.
Yeah.
Germany's resurgence after World War I, that had set a terrifying state.
It really had. Germany came out of the First War feeling, humiliated and disillusioned. Then they were hit by hyperinflation, political chaos.
A perfect storm.
Exactly, a perfect breeding ground for the totalitarian ideology of Adolf Hitler. And when he becomes chancellor in January 33, he doesn't waste time. He's got plans. Restore Germany's power, reclaim lost land, and crucially, get more Lebensraum living space.
All flying in the face of the Versailles Treaty.
Completely ignoring it. He starts rearming Germany at an alarming rate, aggressively rebuilding the military machine.
And he just starts grabbing territory, doesn't he? Almost like he's testing how far he can push.
He absolutely is. First, the Rhineland in 36. France could have stopped him easily, but didn't. Then, March 38, Nazi troops just pour into Austria, Hitler's homeland, the Anschluss, swift annexation.
Then Czechoslovakia.
The Sudetenland, specifically, a region with many ethnic Germans. The Czechs mobilized their army, ready to fight, but then came the notorious Munich Conference in October 38.
Where Britain and France basically gave in.
Desperate to avoid another war, they pressured the Czechs to hand over the Sudetenland. Neville Chamberlain, the British PM, comes back waving a piece of paper, famously declaring peace in our time.
A tragic delusion. Churchill saw it immediately, didn't he? Called it a total defeat. He knew appeasement wouldn't work.
It was a catastrophic mistake. Chamberlain genuinely thought he'd stopped a war, but Hitler. In private, talking to his military commanders in May 39, he was chillingly blunt, said further triumphs could not be won without bloodshed. War wasn't just possible, it was inevitable.
He had a clear plan.
A terrifyingly clear plan. Ignore treaties, international law, his words. The aim must be to deal the enemy a smashing blow right at the start. First targets: Holland, Belgium, France. Take them out. Set the stage for war against England. His real intentions were crystal clear, behind all the diplomatic talk.
So looking back, what does this tell us? Hitler's ambitions are obvious. But the world seems almost desperate not to see them.
It's a critical moment, isn't it? How world powers reacted, or rather failed to react. And then the real shocker, the Nazi-Soviet pact in August 39.
Mortal enemies making a deal.
A completely cynical deal, but it worked for both, temporarily. It secured Hitler's eastern flank, gave him the green light for Poland.
And the invasion came swiftly.
September 1st, 1939. The invasion of Poland begins. It showcased the brilliant tactical success of the Blitzkrieg Lightning War. Fast tanks, air support, just overwhelming the defenses. Poland was quickly carved up, with the Soviet Union grabbing about 75,000 square miles for themselves.
And the German people? Were they behind this?
Apparently, many were just dazed. They woke up to find themselves in a war they'd been assured the Führer would somehow avoid. They'd bought into the idea he could get what he wanted without fighting. Reality was a rude awakening.
Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Japan's on its own path of conquest. A similar kind of militaristic drive, building their own empire.
That's right. Militant groups in Japan, like the Kodoha, the Imperial Way faction, they gained huge influence. They pushed violence, military expansion as the answer to Japan's problems, especially popular with younger army officers.
And this fueled their actions in China.
Directly. They'd already occupied Manchuria back in 1931. Then, from July 1937, it was an all-out assault on Chinese provinces. They captured major cities like Tianjin, Peiping.
And that's when they announced the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere.
November 1938. Basically, an economic and political bloc dominated by Japan. But Chiang Kai-shek, China's leader, he rejected it flat out, hoping for Western help,
Right.
which just intensified the fighting.
And this ambition inevitably put Japan on a collision course with the U.S., right?
Exactly. Relations started going downhill fast from 1939. The U.S. ended its trade agreement with Japan, and by 1940, there was an economic embargo. Cut off vital resources like oil, scrap metal.
Which Japan saw as
an unacceptable obstacle. They wanted a free hand in China, regional dominance. The embargo just pushed them further towards thinking a military solution was the only way.
And that Blitzkrieg tactic wasn't just used in Poland.
Yeah.
Western Europe felt its full force very quickly, too.
The speed was terrifying. Denmark and Norway just overrun on April 9th, 1940. There's that famous story about General Falkenhorst, the guy planning the Norway invasion. He had to go buy a travel guide, a Baedeker, just to figure out what Norway was even like. Then, just over a month later, May 14th, 1940, the Panzer Avalanche. German tanks break through the French lines, stretching back for 100 miles in 3 columns.
And Paris.
Paris fell on June 14th. With scarcely one shot fired in its defense, Marshal Pétain asked for an armistice. France had fallen.
But amidst that collapse, there was Dunkirk, that incredible moment of defiance, the miracle.
It truly felt like one. May 26 to June 4th, 1940, Churchill called it a miracle of deliverance. Over 338,000 British and French troops were trapped, backs to the sea, German army closing in.
And they were rescued by civilian boats.
Everything. Naval destroyers, yes, but also fishing boats, private yachts, pleasure cruisers. This great tide of small vessels just sailed across the channel under constant air attack and shelling.
The losses must have been heavy.
They were. On June 1st alone, 31 ships sunk, 11 damaged, but they got the men out. May 31st and June 1st, they landed 132,000 men back in England. Churchill's assessment was blunt but true. We got the army away, and they have paid fourfold for any losses which they have inflicted.
If you think about the bigger picture, Dunkirk wasn't just a retreat, was it? It was a huge psychological win. It showed this incredible will to keep fighting, even when things looked hopeless.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't a military victory, far from it, but psychologically. Immense. It showed the British people and the world that even smashed militarily, their spirit wasn't broken. It gave them this crucial morale boost when everything seemed lost. Turned a disaster into a symbol of defiance.
And that spirit, that resolve, was absolutely vital for what came next, the Battle of Britain.
Because after France fell, Hitler turned his full attention across the Channel, and Churchill knew, he absolutely believed, that the fate of Western civilization depended on the outcome.
A fight for the skies, Luftwaffe versus the RAF.
A massive struggle for air supremacy. It happened in phases. First, July 10th to August 18th, the Luftwaffe went after convoys, southern ports, trying to wear down the RAF, test their strength.
In the main assault.
August 24th to September 27th. They targeted RAF bases, radar stations, aircraft factories, trying to destroy the RAF completely, paved the way for bombing London into submission, maybe even invasion.
And there was one day, September 15th, that was particularly critical, wasn't it? The turning point.
September 15th was huge. The RAF threw everything they had into the fight, 22 squadrons, many flying multiple times that day, and they inflicted a recognizable disaster on the Luftwaffe, shot down 76 German planes for the loss of 34 British ones, a devastating ratio.
So by the end of it all?
By the end of October 1940, the RAF wasn't destroyed, it was triumphant. They downed 1,733 German aircraft, losing 915 of their own. A decisive victory. It forced Hitler to scrap his invasion plans.
It's just incredible to think about living through that, hearing the sirens, the bombs, night after night, knowing what was truly at stake. How did ordinary Londoners find that kind of strength?
Edward R. Murrow's radio reports from London during the Blitz. They give us such a vivid sense of it. He talked about the calm and courageous spirit, people digging out unexploded bombs, women chatting through shattered windows.
He's carrying on.
Carrying on. He described a man looking at his bombed-out house and just saying, "One fell there, and that's all." Murrow captured the terrifying sounds, the anti-aircraft fire, but also the calm way officials could identify bomb types just by sound. It speaks volumes about human endurance under extreme pressure, doesn't it? That inner strength, born from shared purpose, shared survival.
While the skies over Britain were contested, a different kind of battle was playing out on the seas. The hunt for the Bismarck. This German battleship, it was seen as, invincible, right? A symbol of the master race.
The Bismarck was a powerful symbol. Its first operational voyage in May 1941 was meant to prove that invincibility raid Allied shipping. The British pursuit started immediately. Admiral Tovey's home fleet went after it. But early on, the British suffered a huge blow.
The sinking of the Hood.
Exactly. The battlecruiser HMS Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, sunk in minutes. And the new battleship Prince of Wales was damaged. A painful defeat and frustration for the British. A major morale hit.
A huge setback. But the chase didn't stop there. It became relentless.
Oh, far from it. More ships joined the hunt, converging from all directions. It got intense. There were even mistakes, like planes from the carrier Ark Royal accidentally torpedoing their own cruiser, HMS Sheffield, thankfully without detonation.
But the decisive moment came from a biplane.
Incredible, isn't it? A swordfish torpedo plane. Slow, outdated-looking biplanes, but tough. One of them managed to score a critical hit on the Bismarck's rudder, jammed it. The massive battleship could only steam in circles.
Making it a sitting duck?
Essentially. Its steering gone, it was vulnerable. British ships, like the cruiser Dorsetshire, closed in and pounded it relentlessly. The great chase was over. The Bismarck, despite fighting bravely, finally went down.
The human cost, though.
Terrible. Only 110 survivors picked up out of a crew of about 2,400. Many were young cadets, teenagers, raised on the myth of German invincibility. Sinking the Bismarck wasn't just a naval victory, it shattered that myth. Huge psychological impact on both sides. Boosted Allied morale, dented Axis confidence.
While the Bismarck chase grabbed headlines, Britain was also fighting a crucial, maybe less glamorous, naval war in the Mediterranean, weren't they? Securing supply lines.
Absolutely vital. Admiral Cunningham's forces were key to keeping Malta supplied, countering the Italian Navy. There were tough fights. The Italian battleship Giulio Cesare got hit in July 40. The British carrier HMS Illustrious took a real pounding in January 41 from German dive bombers. 87 Junkers attacked her during Operation Excess.
But the British scored a decisive win there too, right?
Yes, at Cape Matapan in March 1941, planes from the carrier Formidable, along with naval gunfire, helped sink 3 Italian heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers and damaged a battleship. That battle pretty much ended the threat from the Italian surface fleet to Allied convoys in the eastern Mediterranean. A quieter victory than the Bismarck, maybe, but strategically just as critical for the war effort, showed the power of carrier aircraft.
So, while Europe and the Atlantic are ablaze, Japan is launching this massive, coordinated offensive across Asia and the Pacific right after Pearl Harbor.
It was incredibly fast and widespread. Almost immediately, they invaded Thailand and Malaya, overran Guam, Wake Island, launched air attacks on Manila, Shanghai, Singapore, Hong Kong.
Resistance crumbled quickly in some places.
Thailand surrendered quickly, then signed an alliance with Japan. Hong Kong, a major symbol of British power, held out until Christmas Day 1941. Then Kuching and Sarawak fell. The speed and scale were just breathtaking.
But the Philippines, that was different, a much tougher fight.
The Philippines became a major focus. Japan threw 80,000 to 100,000 troops into it. But the American and Filipino forces, badly outnumbered and outgunned, they put up this incredibly tenacious stand. On Luzon, especially the Bataan Peninsula and the fortress island of Corregidor, they fought on until May 1942.
And General MacArthur was central to that defense.
He was, known for his theatrical streak maybe, but undeniably a strategic genius. He refused to consider surrender, even as supplies ran out. But the hard truth was, the Pacific was a low priority for Washington then. They got almost no reinforcements, no supplies. The focus was Europe.
And the conditions for the troops on Bataan sound absolutely horrific from the accounts. Just sheer survival.
Beyond dire. They had nearly 100,000 people to feed troops, civilians, refugees with barely any supplies. They improvised, set up rice mills, bakeries, slaughterhouses, eating horses, mules, wild pigs, caribou.
Towards the end, the rations were tiny.
Just a cup of rice, maybe some mule meat, widespread disease, starvation. Meanwhile, the attacking Japanese army was well fed, using captured supplies from Manila, better prepared for the diseases too.
And then, after the surrender, the Bataan Death March. That name still carries such weight.
April 1942. It was a nightmare of brutality. Prisoners shoved, beaten with rifle butts, bayoneted. Accounts describe stumbling over bodies, seeing smashed figures beside the road constantly, denied food, water. The thirst was unbearable. If you fell, you were often killed on the spot.
The death toll was huge.
Estimated 10,000 American and Filipino prisoners died on that march. And the psychological torture. Tokyo Rose broadcasts every night, telling them they were defeated, abandoned, while American aid went elsewhere. Even the Philippine President Quezon felt this bewildered anger about supplies going to Russia instead of them. They felt totally abandoned.
So what do we take from that? Incredible courage on Bataan, definitely. But that feeling of abandonment, it must have been devastating. Highlights a really tough strategic choice the Allies made.
It really does. It shines a light on that awful moral and strategic dilemma early in the war. The bravery on Bataan was extraordinary, absolutely. But the Europe First strategy, while maybe understandable from a global perspective, came at a terrible human cost in the Pacific. That sense of being sacrificed, it hit morale hard, became a powerful symbol of the lonely sacrifices made in that forgotten corner of the early war.
Thinking about psychological impact.
Yeah.
The Doolittle raid was an early, very daring response to Pearl Harbor, wasn't it? More symbolic than militarily damaging, perhaps.
Very much so. April 18th, 1942, a direct counterpunch. Launched from the USS Hornet, but they had to launch much earlier than planned.
Why was that?
Japanese picket ships spotted the task force, so instead of a night raid, they had to go in daylight, taking off 620 miles from Japan. Much riskier.
And the sources say, kind of strangely, that the raid seemed almost like a stroke of genius to the Japanese.
Yeah.
Confused them.
It's a fascinating detail. Apparently, things like faulty instruments, hard weather, and human error during the B-25's flight path meant they approached Tokyo from all different directions. This bizarre and circumstantial pattern, as one source puts it, turned miraculously into what seemed a stroke of genius.
So the Japanese couldn't figure out where they came from.
Exactly. Wholly mystified and deceived. That confusion amplified the psychological shock for them, made them rethink their defenses, and maybe contributed to some bad decisions later, like at Midway. For the American public back home, though, it was a massive morale boost. Proof Japan wasn't untouchable, proof America could hit back. The psychological win far outweighed the actual damage.
That really raises a key point. Why was that psychological impact so vital right then, especially for the home front, given the limited military effect?
Because after Pearl Harbor, after the string of rapid Japanese victories across the Pacific, American morale was really shaken, deeply. The Doolittle raid, even though it didn't sink ships or destroy factories in a big way, it changed the story. It showed Japan was vulnerable right on its home islands. And more importantly, it showed America had the guts, the ingenuity to strike back. It replaced some of that fear and uncertainty with a real, tangible act of defiance, of retribution. It told the American people, this fight is far from over.
Okay, so after that psychological boost, the Pacific War reached a real undeniable turning point. The Battle of Midway, June 1942. This was huge.
Midway was critical. The island itself was heavily defended, described as tough as a hickory nut. The American air units there were a mixed bag, though. Some planes, like the Brewster Buffalo fighters, were so bad they were nicknamed flying coffins. Others, the Vought Vindicators, were called vibrators. Not exactly confidence-inspiring.
And the battle started with a Japanese attack on the island itself.
Right. Their plan was to knock out the defenses, then seize the island, use the airstrips, part of a larger plan to lure out and destroy the remaining American carriers.
But the American counterattacks.
Yes.
They were desperate, but ultimately they turned the tide.
Absolutely desperate and incredibly brave. You have to talk about Lieutenant Commander John Waldron's Torpedo Squadron 8, flying slow, vulnerable torpedo bombers straight into a wall of Japanese anti-aircraft fire, and 0 fighters.
Almost wiped out.
Completely wiped out, except for one survivor, Ensign George Gay. He described getting hit while trying to torpedo the carrier Kaga, seeing the Japanese captain on the bridge jumping up and down, raising hell. Waldron's last transmission was just heartbreaking. Watch those fighters, how am I doing? Splash! Just gut-wrenching.
But while Torpedo 8 was being sacrificed,
dive bombers arrived. McCluskey's squadrons from the Enterprise in Yorktown. They caught the Japanese carriers at the worst possible moment, planes on deck being rearmed and refueled. They hit the Akagi and the Soryu, turning them into infernos. That's when Captain Yanagimoto on the Soryu gave that famous last order. Abandon ship. Banzai. Banzai. Devastation and defiance right there.
Just unbelievable chaos and heroism happening all at once. The American carrier Yorktown didn't escape unscathed, though.
No, the Yorktown took multiple torpedo hits later in the battle. Despite heroic efforts to save her, she eventually sank. But a crucial element in the American victory was actually a Japanese mistake.
An intelligence failure.
A major one. A pilot with bad eyesight reported seeing a much larger American force than was actually there. 4 enemy carriers, 6 cruisers, and 15 destroyers. Admiral Nagumo passed this faulty intel up to Admiral Yamamoto, and it badly skewed their decision-making. That, combined with the American code-breaking success, really sealed their fate.
So Midway was the turning point.
Undeniably. The end of Japan's seemingly unstoppable advance, the beginning of the long, hard American offensive across the Pacific. A massive shift in naval power, won against the odds.
From the open ocean of Midway, the fight then shifted to the jungles. Guadalcanal. A totally different kind of brutal warfare.
Guadalcanal, starting August 1942, running into early 43. Hugely strategic. Why? The Japanese were building an airfield there. If completed, it would threaten the vital Allied supply lines to Australia.
So the U.S. had to take it.
Had to. The 1st Marine Division landed August 7th, 1942. Took the airfield relatively quickly after some initial fighting. But holding it, and the island, that was the brutal part.
What were the main challenges, besides the intense Japanese resistance?
Supply lines were a huge problem initially for the Allies. There were times the Marines were desperately short of food and ammo. Interestingly, they got some good intelligence from surrendering Korean laborers who'd been forced to work for the Japanese.
And the Japanese counterattacks.
Fierce, but often poorly coordinated. Communication problems plagued them. They launched attacks piecemeal instead of altogether, which allowed the Marines to beat them back, though often just barely.
And the fighting on the ground itself was incredibly savage, right? Places like Bloody Ridge.
Bloody Ridge was horrific. Non-stop assaults, often hand-to-hand combat in the dark. Colonel Merritt Edson's Marines held on against wave after wave of Japanese attacks. The Marine artillery unleashed probably the heaviest massed fire the campaign had produced to date, just saturating the ridge, inflicting terrible casualties. And at sea, Rear Admiral Willis Lee scored a crucial win, his battleship USS Washington using radar to sink the Japanese battleship Hiroshima. That secured the sea lanes, finally allowing reliable supplies to reach the Marines.
But the toll. The jungle itself was an enemy.
Absolutely. Disease was rampant. One source says very, very few of the Marines failed to contract at least malaria. The jungle environment, the heat, the insects, the constant damp, it was as much an enemy as the Japanese soldiers.
And a similar nightmare scenario played out on the Kokoda Trail in New Guinea, another jungle meat grinder.
The Kokoda Trail campaign, September 42 onwards. Just brutal. The terrain was unbelievably terrible, steep mountains, thick jungle, mud, rain, and the Japanese fought with absolute stubborn fury.
But the jungle hit them hard, too.
It did. The sources say the jungle beat the Japanese. They suffered terribly from starvation, scrub typhus, dysentery. Supply lines broke down. There are stories of incredible Australian heroism, like a wounded soldier playing dead to warn his patrol about an ambush. And the fighting itself often ended in brutal bayonet charges into hidden Japanese positions. Just Pretty terrible business, as one account puts it. Raw, close-quarters combat.
Okay, this is really striking. That raw experience of fighting the landscape itself, the jungle, the disease, the sheer difficulty of just existing there.
Yeah.
Sounds like that was almost as big a challenge as the enemy soldiers.
It absolutely was. And it fundamentally shaped the war in the Pacific. Unlike Europe, the jungle magnified every problem. Supply was a nightmare. Disease could cripple units faster than bullets. And the terrain itself often dictated everything, limiting movement, visibility. So battles weren't just force on force, they were struggles for survival against the environment. Add the Japanese stubborn fury, their fight to the death mentality. It turned these campaigns into these long, grinding battles of attrition. Every yard gained cost blood. It forged a very different kind of soldier.
While all this is happening in the Pacific, the Eastern Front is just a conflict on an unimaginable scale, culminating in Stalingrad.
The German invasion of Russia, Operation Barbarossa, June 1941. Initially, it looked unstoppable. Panzer divisions just sliced through Soviet lines on a 1,000-mile front, took hundreds of thousands of prisoners, and circled entire armies.
Hitler thought it was over quickly.
He did. By autumn 41, he thought Russia was finished. Big miscalculation. The advance slowed down arguments between Hitler and his generals about strategy played a part, and then the Russian winter hit hard. Failing to take Moscow that winter was the first major crack in the myth of the invincible German army.
And then came Stalingrad, a name that just evokes utter destruction.
Stalingrad. July 42 to February 43. It became the ultimate symbol of attritional warfare. Germany's entire Sixth Army, under General Paulus, got sucked into this grotesque jungle of destruction in the city ruins.
House-to-house fighting.
Brutal. Room to room sometimes. The casualties on both sides were astronomical, hundreds of thousands. It was the most calamitous defeat for the Nazis up to that point. Shattered the myth of German invincibility for good.
And Hitler's reaction to the surrender.
Furious. He raged against Paulus for surrendering, especially after he just promoted him to field marshal, expecting him to commit suicide rather than be captured. Called it a besmirchment of heroism. The sheer scale of Stalingrad, the losses, it just bled the German army white on the Eastern Front, tied up massive resources.
That raises a really important point. How did the sheer scale of the fighting on the Eastern Front impact the overall Allied strategy? Did it make a difference in the West?
A massive difference. The Eastern Front absorbed the lion's share of the German army, their best divisions, their equipment. It was a relentless meat grinder that inflicted catastrophic losses on the Wehrmacht. They simply couldn't replace men and machines fast enough. This continuous drain meant Hitler had far fewer resources, fewer experienced troops to defend Western Europe or Italy. It made operations like D-Day and the subsequent campaigns significantly more achievable for the Western Allies. So, while fought somewhat separately, the Eastern Front was absolutely indispensable to the overall Allied victory. It bled Germany dry.
Okay, so as the Eastern Front grinds on, the Western Allies start their own push against Fortress Europe, beginning in North Africa. A totally different kind of war again, desert warfare.
North Africa was definitely a different theater. Back and forth swings initially. Italians advanced, British pushed back, then Rommel arrived with the Africa Corps, and things got serious for the British.
Until Montgomery showed up.
Entered General Bernard Law Montgomery. Churchill gave him a very clear order. Rommel must be destroyed. Montgomery was, well, eccentric, didn't smoke, drink, swear, early riser, fanatical about training, physical fitness. A martinet, some called him, but also had a flamboyant side, an absolute self-belief.
And he proved strategically sharp, didn't he? Especially early on at Alam Halfa.
He did. Alam Halfa, August 42. Using excellent intelligence, Montgomery predicted exactly where Rommel would attack. And instead of charging out to meet him, he set up strong defensive positions and let Rommel's panzers break themselves against them. Very clever. It set the stage perfectly for the big one. El Alamein.
October 1942, the turning point in North Africa.
Absolutely. By then, Montgomery had overwhelming superiority men, tanks, air power. He famously declared, "It is now mathematically certain that I will eventually destroy Rommel." And he did, through a methodical, grinding battle. He used a complex deception plan, too, called Supercharge, to fool Rommel about where the main attack would come. Dummy tanks, fake pipelines, the works.
And Rommel himself, the famous Desert Fox. Sources say he was starting to have doubts about Hitler even then.
That's a crucial insight into the cracks appearing in the Nazi command. Yes, Rommel was growing increasingly disillusioned with Hitler's interference and strategic mistakes, even while fighting his hardest in Africa. He actually secretly supported the general's plot to remove Hitler, realizing the war was likely lost, and urging Hitler to negotiate. Futile, of course.
And while Alamein was happening, the Americans arrived.
Operation Torch, November 1942. Allied landings in Morocco and Algeria, led by Eisenhower, faced varying levels of resistance from the Vichy French forces there. Eventually, after some tough fighting like the Battle of Kasserine Pass, where Rommel gave the inexperienced Americans a bloody nose, the Axis forces were squeezed out. They surrendered in Tunisia in May 1943. North Africa was secured for the Allies, opened the door to invade Italy.
Let's talk about the American soldier in North Africa. That experience must have changed them profoundly, from green troops to hardened veterans.
It absolutely did. There's a powerful account from war correspondent Ernie Pyle describing how killing now was as much a profession as writing was for me. The initial shock wore off. It became just the job. There's huge respect for the infantry, the mud, rain, frost, and wind boys, as Pyle called them. The guys who lived rough, slept on the ground, endured the shelling. They learned to live without the necessities.
Kasserine Pass must have been a brutal lesson.
A very harsh lesson. Rommel's panzers hit them hard, but they learned fast. That experience, though costly, forged them into tougher, more effective soldiers. It was a rapid, brutal education in modern warfare.
It sounds incredibly grim, but were there moments of humanity or relief?
Pyle captures that, too. Even amidst the wholesale death and vile destruction, there were these spasmodic moments. After a victory, a feeling almost like a holiday, being suddenly free like kids at a fair. He tells a funny story about the useless handbrace on jeeps and how the sound of a spinning tire could make battle-hardened soldiers dive for cover, thinking it was an incoming plane. Little moments of shared reality, humor mixed with constant tension.
And Pyle noted a shift in perspective, too, about America's role in the world.
He did. Initially, soldiers were homesick, impatient with foreign ways, but he saw their scope is broadening despite themselves. Fighting overseas, seeing other cultures, experiencing this global conflict firsthand. Pyle believed it would ensure America would never be isolationist again. Interestingly, he also noted that despite the hardships, the soldiers' overall health was often better than back home, thanks to good Army food and medical care. A stark contrast to, say, Bataan.
Moving from the ground in North Africa to the air over Europe, the strategic bombing campaign against Germany was a massive undertaking. We have an account of one specific dangerous mission, the B-17 raid on Regensburg.
Yes, targeting a vital Messerschmitt aircraft factory, previously inaccessible and critically important. A tension described as palpable right from the start. As soon as they crossed into Holland, they knew German radar had them. Luftwaffe fighters would be coming.
And the flak, anti-aircraft fire.
Started late, inaccurate, then got intense. Then the coordinated fighter attacks began. Messerschmitt 109s coming in from all angles. The B-17 gunners are described as lashing the sky with ropes of orange tracers, trying to fend off the cannon fire tearing into their formations.
Just terrifying. Planes being shot down all around them.
Absolutely. Crew members bailing out of burning bombers. One B-17 described flying for half an hour with its wing tanks ablaze, smoke pouring out, flames visible through the metal skin. 4 crew members had to jump from the bomb bay, delaying opening their parachutes to avoid being shot or landing too far behind enemy lines. Imagine the fear.
And yet they had to stay focused on the target.
The bombardiers, described as grim as death, had to synchronize their bomb sights on the factory complex below. And amidst all that chaos, hitting the target was a moment of grim satisfaction. One crew reported seeing a rectangular pillar of smoke rising after their bombs hit. It really captures the incredible pressure, the constant danger, and those fleeting moments of mission accomplished that these bomber crews lived with daily.
Okay, so from North Africa, the next logical step for the Allies was Italy. But that turned into a really tough, grinding campaign, didn't it? Very different from the desert.
Very different. First came Sicily, Operation Husky, July 43, Eisenhower leading, American and British landings. Some early successes like the U.S. 1st Infantry Division beating back a big German tank attack at Gela. But the invasion of mainland Italy in September 43 that became this long, exhausting campaign.
Why was it so slow?
Partly due to a shortage of assault shipping and landing craft, but mostly the terrain. Italy is mountainous, rugged, perfect for defense. The Germans were masters at using it, setting up strong defensive lines across the peninsula. It forced the Allies into this slow, incredibly costly advance up the Italian boot.
And the battles around Monte Cassino? They became infamous for their sheer brutality.
Monte Cassino fought from January to May 1944. Just brutal. The Allies faced elite German paratroopers dug into incredibly strong positions around this historic monastery. The Allies tried massive bombardments, pouring in shells 10,000 an hour at times, dropping huge amounts of bombs, 1,400 tons on about a square mile around the monastery itself.
But it didn't work as expected.
It didn't dislodge them. The dogma that weight of metal could so stun the defenders proved wrong. After the heaviest bombing, the Germans were still there, able to slow the Allied advance, even reinforce their positions at night somehow. The rubble actually made defending easier in some ways. It turned into this attritional nightmare, a real slugfest.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How the Italian terrain and those German defenses created such a different kind of war compared to the sweeping movements elsewhere. Really shows how geography shapes conflict.
It completely changed the game. Forget the open desert or the relatively flat plains of France. Italy's mountains allowed the Germans to build these incredibly tough defensive lines, like the Gustav Line at Cassino. It forced the Allies into frontal assaults, slow, bloody work, breaching one defense line after another. Required totally different tactics, immense cost in lives. A stark reminder that strategy always has to adapt to the ground you're fighting on.
That hard slog through Italy was crucial, but the main event, the one everyone was waiting for against Hitler's Fortress Europe, was D-Day. June 6, 1944.
Operation Overlord. Eisenhower's massive assignment. The scale was unprecedented, and the planning meticulous, especially the deception plan, Operation Fortitude.
The Ghost Army.
Exactly. Dummy tanks, fake camps, phony radio traffic, even carefully targeted bombing raids. All designed to convince the Germans the real invasion would hit the Pas-de-Calais, the shortest point across the channel. Not Normandy.
And the whole thing was nearly called off because of the weather, right? Huge pressure on Eisenhower.
Massive pressure. The original date was June 5th, but a huge storm blowing high winds, rough seas, landings would be impossible, air support grounded. Eisenhower had to make the call in the pre-dawn hours of June 4th, postponed to the 6th. A huge gamble on a narrow weather window, but it paid off. By early morning June 6th, the giant armada was assembled, men climbing down nets and pitching landing craft. Then the naval bombardment started, answered fiercely by German shore batteries.
But on some beaches, especially Omaha, it went horribly wrong.
Yeah.
An epic human tragedy, the sources call it.
Omaha was almost a disaster. The preliminary bombing missed the defenses, the landing craft hit sandbars or were swamped, men jumped into deep water and drowned under heavy packs, machine gun fire swept the beach the second the ramps dropped. The description, churning sea runs red, is horrifyingly accurate. Units like Able Company just disintegrated, leadership gone in minutes, men huddled behind obstacles, paralyzed by fear and shock, or desperately trying to advance under withering fire. Utter chaos.
And the paratroopers dropping behind the lines? They faced their own kind of chaos and danger.
They really did. Rommel had prepared anti-paratroop measures, like flooding low-lying areas, creating these death traps where guys drown in the swamps, weighed down by gear. At Saint-Mere-Église, paratroopers landed right in the town square, under heavy German fire. That's where Private John Steele dangled from the church steeple for hours, pretending to be dead, watching the battle unfold below him.
Just unbelievable stories, scattered units facing huge odds.
Staggering odds. Units landed miles from their drop zones, completely mixed up. There were even bizarre moments of German and American soldiers literally bumping into each other in the dark and just carrying on. Surreal.
Okay, let's pause here because this is incredible. The sheer scale of D-Day, all that meticulous planning, and then on the ground, especially Omaha. Utter chaos. It's almost unbelievable it succeeded. What does that tell you?
It tells you about the friction of war, doesn't it? How even the best plans can fall apart in the face of enemy action and sheer chance. But it also speaks volumes about the resilience, the initiative of the individual soldiers. When units broke down, when officers were killed, small groups of men, sometimes just individuals, kept pushing forward, improvising, taking objectives. The strategic planning got them to the beaches, but the success on the beaches often came down to countless acts of raw courage and determination in the face of terrifying odds. D-Day is a testament to that human element overcoming chaos.
While the Allies are fighting their way into France, there's this dramatic internal struggle happening inside Germany. The July 20th plot to kill Hitler.
A desperate gamble by a group within the German military and aristocracy. They saw the war was lost, Hitler was leading Germany to ruin. Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg placed a briefcase bomb near Hitler during a military conference.
But Hitler survived. Miraculously, almost.
Astonishingly. The meeting was moved at the last minute from a concrete bunker to a wooden hut. When the bomb went off, the blast went outwards, blew the roof off rather than being contained. Hitler was injured, his eardrums burst, but very much alive.
And the coup attempt that followed, Operation Valkyrie, it just fizzled out.
It fell apart quickly. It was triggered prematurely based on false reports Hitler was dead. Then a key figure, Major Otto Römer, commanding troops in Berlin, got suspicious. He contacted Goebbels, the propaganda minister, who put him straight through to Hitler on the phone. Once Römer knew Hitler was alive, he turned his troops against the plotters.
And the reprisals were swift and brutal.
Immediate and savage. Stauffenberg and other key plotters were rounded up and shot in the courtyard of the War Ministry that same night. General Beck tried to shoot himself, failed, and was finished off by a sergeant. Hitler went on the radio, claiming divine providence saved him, confirming his mission. A massive purge followed. Thousands arrested, executed. Even Field Marshal Rommel, implicated, was forced to commit suicide by taking poison to protect his family.
That's a crucial point. The plot failed, revealing divisions, yes, but also showing Hitler's absolute, terrifying grip on power, even as Germany was clearly losing the war. What does that say about his control?
It's chilling, isn't it? Even with the Reich collapsing, Hitler's personal authority remained immense, terrifying. The fact that this plot involving high-ranking officers could be crushed so quickly, so brutally, it shows the pervasive fear and, in some cases, fanatical loyalty he still commanded. Major Römer's actions were pivotal. It demonstrates that the regime's internal weaknesses were ultimately no match for Hitler's personal magnetism and the terror apparatus he controlled. It essentially crushed any chance of internal resistance ending the war, ensuring it would drag on to Germany's utter destruction, driven solely by his will.
And speaking of dragging on, Germany threw everything into one last, desperate offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge.
December 1944, a massive surprise counterattack through the Ardennes Forest. It became the greatest pitched battle in American history in terms of numbers involved. It caught the Allies completely by surprise.
Why were they so unprepared?
Partly because Allied intelligence underestimated Hitler's willingness to gamble everything. They also didn't fully realize how tightly Hitler now controlled the military after the July plot, overriding his generals' cautious advice to launch this huge offensive. It caused initial confusion, near panic in some sectors.
But the American troops held on. Bastogne became legendary.
Their resilience was incredible. Many units were overrun, isolated, but others just dug in and fought. The stand of the 101st Airborne Division at the crossroads town of Bastogne is the most famous example, completely surrounded by German forces.
And when the Germans demanded surrender?
Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe gave that classic, defiant, one-word reply: nuts. Eventually, the weather cleared, allowing Allied air power to hammer the German tanks and, crucially, allowed resupply planes to reach the besieged troops in Bastogne. The garrison was relieved, the German offensive blunted, then pushed back. But the cost was enormous. Nearly 77,000 American casualties. It was Germany's last gasp in the West. Its failure sealed their fate.
As the Allies pushed towards Germany's heartland in early 45, there's this incredible moment of opportunity at the Rhine River. The bridge at Remagen. It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie.
It really does. March 1945. Allied armies are driving towards the Rhine. American forces make this rapid dash towards the town of Remagen and find it. The Ludendorff Railway Bridge is still standing. The Germans hadn't managed to destroy it yet.
A split-second decision.
Absolutely. The order came down. Seize it. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann led his men in a charge towards the bridge. Just as they reached it, the Germans set off a preliminary demolition charge on the approach ramp, blowing a huge crater, but not destroying the bridge itself.
So they charged onto a bridge they knew was wired to explode. Incredible bravery.
Unbelievable. They could see the demolition wires draped across the bridge. Sergeant Alexander Drubick was apparently the first American across. Sergeant Joseph Delisio made this weaving and bobbing run under fire to cut wires. They stormed the towers on the far side, capturing Germans who were ready to surrender. Engineers rushed onto the bridge, frantically working to disable the main charges and make it strong enough for tanks, all while under intense German artillery and air attack.
And the strategic impact was immediate.
Huge. This golden opportunity, as it was called, allowed 5 U.S. divisions to pour across the Rhine much faster, much more easily than anyone expected. It completely wrong-footed the German high command, who assumed all Rhine bridges would be blown. It drastically sped up the final Allied advance into Germany.
Okay, let's unpack that Remagen moment. The sheer audacity, the incredible luck that the bridge was still there, and the immediate strategic payoff. It's just pure high drama, high stakes.
It's a perfect storm, isn't it? Incredible bravery, yes, but also German incompetence or bad luck in failing to destroy the bridge properly. Seizing it was a calculated risk that paid off spectacularly. It saved potentially weeks, maybe months, of fighting and countless lives that would have been lost in opposed river crossings elsewhere. It became this powerful symbol of Allied momentum, the Germans crumbling, and the importance of seizing unexpected opportunities in war, a true turning point in the final campaign.
With the Rhine breached, the final collapse of the Third Reich happened quickly, didn't it? Culminating in the fall of Berlin and Hitler's end.
It was swift. Allied armies advanced from the west and east. Montgomery pushed north. Bradley's forces encircled the Ruhr industrial area, trapping over 300,000 German troops, a massive surrender. By April 45, the Soviets were fighting their way into Berlin itself. The city was chaos bombing, shelling, civilians hiding in subway tunnels.
Hitler, trapped in his bunker.
Deep beneath the Reich Chancellery. In the last days of April, knowing the end was near, he dictated his will, married Eva Braun, distributed poison capsules to his remaining staff, said his goodbyes.
And then?
On April 30th, around 2:30 in the afternoon, Hitler and Eva Braun committed suicide. Their bodies were carried outside into the Chancellery garden, doused with gasoline and burned. A grim, desperate end witnessed by a few loyal SS guards. One described the scene as repulsive in the extreme. The remaining German forces in Berlin surrendered to the Soviets on May 1st. The official end of hostilities in Europe, VE Day, was declared on May 8th.
But even as victory celebrations were beginning, the world was starting to confront the true horror of what the Nazis had done, the liberation of the concentration camps.
The reports coming out were devastating. Edward R. Murrow's broadcast from Buchenwald, just 5 miles outside the cultured city of Weimar. It's incredibly powerful, stark reporting. He emphasized it was built to last. He described seeing the surviving prisoners, this evil-smelling crowd in rags. Death had already marked many of them, but they were smiling with their eyes.
And he contrasted that with the scene just outside the wire.
That's what struck him so forcefully. Inside, horror. Outside, well-fed Germans plowing their fields, seemingly oblivious or indifferent. A chilling juxtaposition highlighting complicity, or at least willful ignorance.
The details he shared about conditions inside, just unimaginable.
He described the camp hospital. Most of the patients could not move. He went to the crematorium area, saw piles of bodies stacked up like cordwood. They were thin and very white. Some had been shot through the head. He estimated seeing more than 500 men and boys lying dead there, with more piled in a trailer. He also mentioned how deeply the news of President Roosevelt's death on April 12th had affected the prisoners, even in their state. FDR's name had represented the full measure of their hope. His death was another blow.
This really raises a critical point. The liberation of camps like Buchenwald revealed the true, hideous face of Nazi tyranny. It must have underscored the absolute necessity of the fight, right? The moral clarity.
Absolutely. Undeniably. The atrocities uncovered were horrifying, sickening proof of the regime's genocidal aims, its utter depravity. Seeing that evidence, hearing those testimonies, it galvanized public opinion, removed any lingering doubt about the nature of the enemy. It cemented the moral imperative of the Allied cause. This wasn't just about territory. It was a fight against an evil that had to be completely eradicated, no matter the cost. It justified the immense sacrifices made.
So as the war ends in Europe, the fight in the Pacific is still raging, island by bloody island, against an enemy refusing to quit.
The advance continued relentlessly. MacArthur's forces in the Southwest Pacific captured key islands like Los Negros and Manus in early '44. These victories cut off the major Japanese base, Ebra, leaving tens of thousands of Japanese troops isolated, left to wither on the vine, as the saying went.
And then came battles like Saipan, particularly brutal, known for the Japanese gyokusai or death charges.
Saipan, June-July '44, was incredibly vicious. That concept of gyokusai, choosing honorable death over surrender, dramatically changed the fighting. Reports describe Japanese soldiers who couldn't walk being killed by their own side before the final charge began. Those who fought often had swords or bamboo spears because there weren't enough rifles.
The casualties were horrific.
Staggering. Over 23,000 Japanese killed, nearly 3,500 Americans dead. And the subsequent captures of nearby Guam and Tinian were similarly costly. Each island was a painful, grinding step closer to Japan, illustrating just how bloody the fight became when facing that fight to the death doctrine.
While the ground troops were fighting through islands, the Navy had a huge victory in the air. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot.
That was the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 1920-1944. A grim nickname, but accurate. By this point, Japanese naval air power, once dominant, was just greatly outclassed by U.S. Hellcat fighter planes. Admiral Mark Mitcher's pilots scrambled again and again.
And the results were devastating for Japan.
Absolutely devastating. Over 400 Japanese planes shot down in 2 days. Many experienced pilots lost. Some planes just got lost, wandered off course, and were picked off. It effectively broke the back of Japanese carrier air power. They never recovered from that blow. A fundamental shift in air superiority.
And then came the biggest naval battle in history, Lake Gulf, Japan's last desperate throw of the dice.
Lake Gulf, October 23-25, 1944. A desperate gamble indeed. Japan's complex plan aimed to conquer or to die, to somehow wipe out the American landings at Lake Gulf, which had just begun. It involved multiple Japanese naval forces converging. A key part was Admiral Ozawa's Northern Force carriers, with very few planes left acting as a decoy to lure Admiral Halsey's powerful Third Fleet away from the landing beaches.
While other Japanese forces tried to hit the landings.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Admiral Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, protecting the landings, had older battleships incredibly. Some had been raised from the mud of Pearl Harbor and repaired.
What were some of the key moments in this huge, sprawling battle?
So many moving parts. The cruiser USS Honolulu took a torpedo hit early on. Vice Admiral Kurida's powerful central force, including the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, broke through and attacked American escort carriers. The Musashi itself was eventually sunk after taking numerous bomb and torpedo hits from U.S. planes, a huge loss for Japan.
And Halsey took the bait. Chased the decoy carriers.
He did. Halsey, believing Kurida's force was retreating after the Musashi sinking, steamed north full speed after Ozawa's decoy carriers, leaving the San Bernardino Strait unguarded. Then Kurita unexpectedly turned back towards Lake Gulf. Halsey later realized his mistake, feeling like one piece missing from the puzzle.
So Kurita almost got through to the landing fleet.
He almost did. There was also a ferocious night battle down south in Surigao Strait, where American destroyers and Kinkaid's old battleships absolutely decimated another Japanese force under Admiral Nishimura using torpedoes and radar-directed gunfire. A classic crossing the T maneuver. Then Admiral Shima's smaller force sailed into the strait, saw the wreckage, fired some torpedoes wildly, and retreated, described as a comic anticlimax.
But the most dramatic part was off Samar, right? The small escort carriers against battleships.
Absolutely incredible. Kurita's massive force stumbled upon a group of slow, lightly armored American escort carriers and their screening destroyers codenamed Taffy 3. They were completely outgunned, but they fought back with unbelievable courage. Destroyers charged battleships, launching torpedoes, laying smoke screens. Pilots from the carriers made dummy attack runs after running out of bombs. Admiral Spurg, commanding Taffy 3, later expressed his thankful bewilderment at their survival, crediting the smoke, the torpedo attacks, and the definite partiality of Almighty God. Kurita, confused and having taken some damage, eventually turned away. Lake Gulf crippled the Japanese Navy for good.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How close Japan came at Late Day, despite their losses, and how American resilience, maybe some Japanese confusion and sheer luck turned the tide in such a massive engagement. Shows how thin the line is.
It really does. The Japanese plan was incredibly bold, maybe too complex. Halsey chasing the decoy was a huge risk that almost backfired catastrophically. But ultimately, Japanese errors misjudging American strength, communication failures, combined with the absolutely stunning bravery of small units like Taffy 3, prevented disaster. It highlights how individual actions, moments of heroism, and maybe just plain luck can swing even the biggest battles. History turning on a dime.
After Leyte, the island hopping continued towards Japan. Next up, Iwo Jima, a name synonymous with brutal fighting. Uncommon valor was a common virtue.
Iwo Jima, February-March 1945. Strategically, it was vital primarily as an emergency landing field for B-29 bombers flying raids against Japan from the Marianas. Having Iwo Jima cut 1,300 miles off the return trip for damaged bombers, saving planes and crews.
But the island was a fortress.
An incredible fortress. The Japanese commander, General Kuribayashi, was brilliant. He built this intricate defense-in-depth system. Miles of underground tunnels connecting caves, bunkers, hidden gun positions that could fire in all directions. And crucially, his orders were not to fire immediately when the Marines landed, but to wait, draw them in, conserve ammo, maximize casualties, make them pay for every inch.
And the fighting was just relentless, a meat grinder.
Absolutely relentless. Marines had to clear these fortifications one by one, often with flamethrowers, grenades, close-in fighting. The cost was horrific. Almost 7,000 Americans killed, 19,000 wounded, and the Japanese defenders. Out of 21,000, only 216 were taken prisoner. They fought virtually to the last man following Kuribayashi's orders.
And the flag raising on Mount Suribachi became the iconic image of the Pacific War, didn't it?
It did. Though it's important to remember there were actually two flag raisings. The first, smaller flag was raised spontaneously by a patrol that reached the summit. The second, larger flag raising, the one captured in Joe Rosenthal's famous photograph, happened later that day. Ordered partly to inspire the troops still fighting below, and it certainly became that powerful symbol of sacrifice and eventual victory for everyone back home.
So what does Iwo Jima ultimately signify? That sheer determination on both sides? It's almost beyond comprehension, the extremes of human endurance.
It really showcases the ultimate horror of fighting an enemy determined to die rather than surrender, defending their homeland, following their code of honor. For the Americans, it demonstrated the incredible grit needed to overcome seemingly impossible defenses, the willingness to pay that terrible price for a vital piece of volcanic rock. Both sides pushed human limits. Iwo Jima became this brutal symbol of the anticipated cost of invading Japan itself.
The last major battle was Okinawa, even larger, bloodier, and marked by a terrifying new tactic, the kamikaze.
Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, April to June 1945. This was planned as the final staging base for the invasion of Japan's main islands. The Allied invasion force was colossal, over 1,500 ships, 500,000 men, but the Japanese defense introduced the kamikaze, the divine wind, on a massive scale.
Suicide attacks.
Pilots deliberately crashing their planes loaded with bombs into Allied ships, a terrifying, desperate measure.
Reading the accounts from sailors who faced them, it sounds like pure psychological terror, a different kind of warfare entirely.
It was deeply unnerving. Take the destroyer USS Hadley. It fought off waves of kamikazes. The crew's feeling is captured vividly. How long can men who want to live fight off men who want to die? This wasn't battle. It was insanity, lunatic idiocy. They fought desperately against what felt like brain-addled death itself, shooting down plane after plane. The Hadley itself accounted for 12 before being hit and knocked out of action. The sheer willingness of these pilots to die made every encounter horrific, profoundly shaking for the Allied sailors. Okinawa also coincided with the final Japanese defeat in Burma, truly marking the end of their imperial dreams.
So from Pearl Harbor's shock, through years of brutal fighting across the globe, we arrive at the war's end. But it didn't end conventionally. It ended with the dawn of a terrifying new age, the atomic age.
This story starts really back in January 1939. German scientists split the uranium atom. That discovery immediately worried physicists like Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein. They realized the potential for a weapon of terrible proportions, especially if Hitler got it first.
So they warned President Roosevelt.
They did. That warning sparked the Manhattan Project, a top-secret, massive scientific and industrial effort spread across the U.S. Unprecedented scale and secrecy.
Culminating in the first test.
Alamogordo, New Mexico, July 16, 1945, 5:30 a.m. The description is stark. The atomic age opened with a flash that lighted the skies 250 miles away and brightened ground zero with the dazzle of many suns. A terrifying success. What's truly fascinating is the sheer scale of it all, the secrecy. Thousands worked on pieces of the puzzle without knowing the whole picture, all driven by the fear Germany might get there first.
And just weeks later, this new power was used. Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
Preparations were made. Hiroshima had seen some evacuation, maybe 90,000 people, but its factories were still working hard, expecting an invasion. August 6, 1945, the B-29 Enola Gay flew towards the city. The uranium bomb, this maze of electronic ingenuity, was assembled during the flight.
The impact was devastating.
Instantaneous and horrific. Intense heat melted roof tiles miles away, charred telephone poles, over 70,000 people killed instantly. There hadn't been a specific air raid alert for that single plane. The Japanese military initially tried to downplay it, call it an ordinary air raid, hoping to rally the nation for one last showdown battle on Japanese soil.
But then came the second bomb.
3 days later, August 9th, Major Charles Sweeney, piloting Boxcar, dropped the second bomb, a plutonium type, on Nagasaki. The primary target, Kokura, was hidden by clouds. Nagasaki was the secondary. That second strike removed any doubt about the weapon's power and America's willingness to use it again.
And that led to Japan's surrender.
Emperor Hirohito intervened, made the decision to surrender, famously saying, "I cannot bear to see my innocent people suffer any longer." Japan accepted the terms of the Potsdam Declaration laid out by the Allies. The war was finally over.
Okay, this is the really heavy part, isn't it? The sheer unimaginable power of these weapons and the agonizing decisions behind using them, decisions made in part with the intention of saving lives by ending the war quickly, avoiding that bloody invasion. It's almost impossible to truly wrap your head around.
It forces us right into the deepest ethical questions about total war, doesn't it? And the immense weight on leaders' shoulders. The decision was driven by the calculation that using the bombs would ultimately cost fewer lives, American and Japanese, than a full-scale invasion of the home islands, which military planners expected to be incredibly bloody. Millions of casualties anticipated. But the immediate human cost in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was catastrophic, undeniable. It's a moment that still sparks intense debate, forcing us to reflect on the limits of warfare, the terrifying power of technology, and the brutal choices leaders face when options seem impossibly grim.
So as we've journeyed through this deep dive, from Pearl Harbor's shockwave across the globe, through tyranny's march, defiance against long odds, the brutal island hopping, the Eastern Front's vastness, the assault on Fortress Europe, and finally, the Pacific's bitter end. It's just an immense canvas. We've seen human ingenuity, courage, and sheer desperation play out on a scale never seen before or since.
It truly reshaped the entire world. The human experiences, the strategic shifts, the technological leaps like radar, jet engines, and of course the bomb and the unbelievable brutality. It's almost too vast to fully grasp. But by looking at these specific stories, these firsthand accounts, we start to get a sense of the depth, the complexity, how millions of individual lives were just swept up and changed forever by these global forces.
As we finish up here, thinking about everything we've covered, what lingering questions do these events leave you, our listeners, with? About the nature of conflict itself, about the incredibly difficult choices faced by leaders and by ordinary people just caught in the middle of it all. Something to ponder.